Hi everybody, you're watching Capital Hunter. Today we're going to look into one of the most interesting, intriguing, and even confusing chapters in Canadian numismatic history. The story goes back all the way to 1967 and still sparks confusion and even heated debate amongst collectors, buyers, and sellers, even today. In 1967, to celebrate the Centennial of Canadian Confederation, the Royal Canadian Mint introduced a brand new set of coins with unique designs by renowned artist Alex Colville. Instead of featuring the iconic designs that appeared on most Canadian denominations from 1937, Alex Colville designed coins that featured Canadian wildlife. The penny had the rock dove, the nickel featured a hare, the dime had a mackerel on it. The quarter was the bobcat. There was the wolf on the 50-cent piece. And of course, the silver dollar featured a majestic image of a Canada goose in flight. Actually, these designs pretty soon themselves became iconic Canadian designs. But something else was happening in 1967. From 1920 all the way to 1966, Canadian coins had been composed of 80% silver and 20% copper. But by 1967, things were changing dramatically. The price of silver was increasing dramatically, and many countries were starting to change their composition of coins. In fact, the United States already discontinued using silver in circulating dimes and quarters starting in 1965, while the Royal Canadian Mint continued to mint 80% silver coins. In 1967, coins initially were minted in 80% silver, but something had to change. As prices escalated, it presented a real dilemma. If the intrinsic value of the silver in a coin increased beyond its face value, this could spur shortages. People would start hoarding coins. And you have to remember too that the Canadian economy, the international economy, was heavily reliant on cash transactions. We didn't have electronic transactions like we do today. You couldn't just swipe a card. Credit cards were far less common. The economy was dominated by cash transactions, and we needed coins to circulate. In fact, there had already been coin shortages in other parts of the world, including in the United States. As the price of silver continued to escalate in 1967, the Royal Canadian Mint had to act. Partway through the year, it reduced the silver content in the coins from 80% to 50%. Fast forward to 1968, and that trend continued. Dimes and quarters were initially minted at 50% silver and then transitioned partway through the year to 100% nickel. And in fact, the 50-cent pieces and the $1 coins were never made of silver in 1968. They were only made of nickel. So 1967 was a transitional year for the composition of dimes and quarters. Or at least that's the official story. But here's the mystery. The Royal Canadian Mint's own published information about these coins from 1967, including their weights and their compositions, just doesn't add up. In fact, there are some rather curious details that defy logic and even the basic principles of mathematics and chemistry. And when you even weigh the coins yourself, the puzzle gets even stranger. And it begs the question, did the Royal Canadian Mint actually produce coins in 50% silver in 1967? Or has the truth been misreported all along? Today we're going to weigh the evidence. Stay tuned. Hi everybody, this is James. You're watching my channel, Capital Hunter. Today we're going to look at the 1967 Centennial of Confederation dimes and quarters. It is a crazy little mystery in Canadian numismatics. On my channel, I do coin roll hunting, and we're looking for silver coins. Every time I find a 1967, I say the same thing. It could be either 50% silver or it could be 80% silver, and there's just no way to know because the specifications are the same. They weigh the same, 5.83 grams. And then I move on. But people often disagree with me on that point. A very common question I get from people is, well, can't you just weigh them to tell the difference? And that would make a lot of sense because the atomic weight of silver and the atomic weight of copper are different. Silver is actually a heavier metal. So if you change the composition and have more copper than silver, logically, mathematically, and via the laws of chemistry, the coin should weigh less. But that's not actually the case. That's not what people observe. In fact, dealers have never been able to find any tangible difference between a 1967 50% or 80% coin. They all weigh in and around 5.83 grams. And so, because the mint has specifically indicated, they have published information that acknowledges that the composition changed in 1967, dealers have to accept the idea that we actually just can't tell the difference. And so if you go to a dealer and try to sell or buy 1967 dimes or quarters, they split the difference and they treat them all as though they're 65% silver. They don't have the time or the inclination to actually test them to see if there's a difference. The question I have is there actually a difference? A little while ago, I was on Facebook Marketplace and somebody was listing 1967 quarters for sale. And they indicated that, and I'm going to just use round numbers here, that maybe 8 of them were 80% silver and 2 of them were 50% silver, and they were pricing them accordingly. I just made a comment to say, hey, just so you know, the specifications are the same. They weigh 5.83 grams. And so there's really no way to tell the difference. So perhaps you might want to change your listing to that effect. The poster was a little bit upset with my comment and pointed me in the direction of the published mint figures on the Mint's website. They're still posted today that I know are absolutely wrong. And what he pointed to was a website that showed that 80% silver quarters from 1967 weighed 5.83 grams, which makes sense because they're consistent with everything back to 1920. But that a 1967 50% silver coin would weigh 5.05 grams, and that a 1968 50% silver coin would weigh 5.05 grams. There's only one problem with that. This is published mint figures. The problem is that no one has ever observed a 1967 or 1968 silver quarter that weighs 5.05 grams. It doesn't exist. In fact, 5.05 grams is the listed weight for a nickel composed quarter from 1968. So, what's the truth? In today's video, I think what we're going to do is weigh some 1967s, some 1968s, to see if we can figure out what is actually going on. So what we're going to do here is just a little bit of old-fashioned scientific observation here. I've got my digital scale. It is accurate to 1/100th of a gram. I've got all of my 1967s here and all of my 1968 quarters. I've got a few reference quarters here. These are composed of nickel. If I take the magnet to them, it's going to attract all of them. So we can show here the difference between the silver and the nickel. Of course, for this to work, you're going to have to trust me that I haven't already separated anything out. There's no hanky-panky going on here. This is just all of my 1967s. I've always treated them as though they're the same, or I haven't been able to tell the difference. So they're all in here together. All right, so first of all, just for reference, we'll take a look at the 1968s, throw them on the scale there. There's 5.03, so that's pretty darn close to the 5.05, 4.99, and that's 5.02. So those are all pretty close to the published specification. And this is where things go sideways. So I'm going to grab these 1967s here. Got a whole whack of these. Oh, you gotta love the sight and sound of silver. So let me just throw them down there. All right, so I think what we'll do, maybe I'll start with a few here. One of the things you'll note is that the specifications say 5.83, and yet we're gonna get some that are a little bit heavier and a little bit lighter. And I don't think that actually has anything to do with the composition, but we're not gonna find any that are anywhere close to 5.05. Another really important consideration is that the specifications for the 1967s, whether they're 50% or 80%, are the same. And I mean also the thickness and the diameter. And what that means is that the volume of the coins should be the same. And that's why it doesn't make a lot of sense that they would weigh the same at 5.83 grams, because the difference in the densities of the metals would suggest that more copper and less silver should be a lighter coin. That's why that seller on Facebook Marketplace got so upset when I tried to suggest they weighed the same, and he was pointing me towards the mint figure saying that the 50% were 5.05 grams. But I did some calculations, and I'll show them on screen here, that show that if all other things are equal, if the volumes are the same for both, the absolute change should be from 5.83 grams to 5.55 grams. A full 0.27 grams lighter. That's pretty significant. That's almost 5%, 4.72%. So what we'll do is we're going to weigh them all, and we're going to see if we actually observe that, or if we're observing that they're all the same, or what the ranges are. So without further ado, I'm going to put a few on the scale here first, and then I'm actually going to weigh them all and get a kind of a range and an average here too. But we'll start with some. I'll actually grab some at the back that look like they're nice and shiny. You can tell that these guys are uncirculated, or mostly uncirculated. So here we go. So 5.97, that's actually higher than the specification. 5.72, that's lower. 5.77, pretty close. 5.8. 5.84, almost bang on our 5.83. Really, really close. 5.98. So we've got some that are pretty close, some that are a little bit lighter, some that are a little bit heavier. I'm going to go through and weigh all of the rest of these. I'll probably speed this up so you don't have to sit through all of this, and then we'll just sort of present what our findings are on all of these. And I realized I got some more here, so you know what, we may as well, we're just going to figure all this out. So we'll try these ones as well and just see, make sure they're not any different. That one's bang on. Well, I think as scientific experiments go, that's about as random a sample as we're going to get. These are silver 1967 coins that I've amassed over a number of years from many, many different places. Some of them through the coin roll hunting and just other junk silver purchases and that. So these didn't all come from the same place. It is not likely that they'd all be the same composition, particularly if we're expecting that half of them are about expected to be 50% and half are expected to be 80%. Anyway, they're all pretty close. So here's where we landed. We had 54 quarters, and the lowest number we got was 5.61 grams. The highest was 6. We actually found a few that were 6. We actually found very few that were even close to 5.61. And the average across all of them was 5.85 grams, which is pretty much on the specification of 5.83. I think this has less to do with the composition and more to do with possibly just quality control in 1967. The fact that some of these would be quite a bit heavier or lighter probably just has to do with the equipment that was used, how they were calibrated, and not so much about the differences in composition. Now, the next thing I want to do is take all of these 50%ers. These are all 1968s. And we're going to see where these land. Because we know that these are supposed to be all 50%. They should all be the same. We'll see what they sit at. So here's one that's pretty uncirculated, looks nice and shiny. And it's 5.79 grams. It's nowhere close to 5.05. Same there. There's one that's quite a bit lighter, 5.57, but again, not anywhere close to 5.05, but it's certainly closer to the 5.55 that would be suggested if we kept the volume the same, but we changed the composition to 50%, but it's the only one so far. So what gives? What is actually happening with the 1967 dimes and quarters? And how is it that the figures on the Mint's website seem to be completely wrong? Well, it's possible that it's just a clerical error and that the incorrect information was put out and published at some point in time. And few would have questioned it going back to the 1960s. People really only started weighing coins and looking at things as closely as they do now, perhaps a little bit later. Was it possibly just an attempt to avoid any kind of coin hoarding, just suggesting that the composition had been decreased and that perhaps there was no real reason why people should hoard coins and pull them out of circulation? We might never really know. In fact, reputable publications like the Charlton Catalog have accepted the idea that the 1967 quarters and dimes have the same specifications, and that's what they publish. And the reason they're probably confident in doing so is because scientific observation, what dealers have seen for years, backs it up, that the quarters are all 5.83 grams and the dimes are all 2.33 grams, and that there has been no difference, despite what is published on the Mint website. So I'm going to answer the question I posed earlier. Is it possible that the Mint didn't actually mint 50% silver coins in 1967? I think they actually probably did. There was a financial and economic imperative to lower the cost of production of the coins. But I think there might be another answer. And it goes back to the assumption we made earlier about the specifications of the coins. And we already know that the Mint specifications published on the site aren't correct. And I think the one variable that can explain why 50% and 80% weigh the same is that they actually have a slightly different volume. We know the diameter is the same because all of the coins, I can stack them up and they look the same. But I suspect that there's just a really slight difference in the thickness of the coin. So slight that you probably can't even tangibly see it. That alone would be enough to account for the fact that they all just weigh the same. It doesn't answer the question as to why the specifications were wrong, but if they got something wrong, they could have certainly got something else wrong as well. Bottom line, I don't think that the Mint was trying to deceive anybody or trick anybody. I don't think that they were in any way, shape, or form trying to hide anything. And I think that the information that's on their website right now is probably just an error. So what does this mean for you as a collector? Well, the fact is the entire industry in Canada has moved on from this question years ago. They've just accepted that there may or may not be a difference, that it's probably equal numbers minted either way, and that there is really no way to tell the difference. And given that, they've just split the difference, and it's calculated as though the silver content is 65%. That's what a dealer is going to base their offer to you if you're trying to sell them coins. And that's what you should expect if you're trying to sell them or buy them. Now, if for some reason you wanted to be 100% certain, I suppose there are some alternatives. Some people say they can hear the difference with a ping test, and that just measures, I guess, the sort of the frequency. And some people say their ears are good enough to hear a difference between 50% and 80%. Personally, I've never really tried all that hard. I never really thought I could tell the difference. I'm not too worried about it. You could also use an XRF machine, I suppose, which might give you a more scientifically calculated composition of the coin. But most people don't have that. It's an expensive piece of equipment. Most dealers don't have an XRF machine. So there you have it. The Royal Canadian Mint's own published information and figures on the 1967 dimes and quarters really just doesn't add up. And it might not make a difference. We know by observation that all the 1967 quarters weigh about 5.83 grams, and so do the 1968s. And it's only the nickel quarters that actually weigh 5.05 grams. So we don't need to rely on the Mint's published figures because we can make these observations ourselves. And it really doesn't matter. The entire coin world has moved on. They split the difference as though it's 65% silver for all the 1967s. It's just the easiest way to deal with it. So in the end, it doesn't really matter. If you do the same thing, you're never going to get shortchanged whether you're buying or selling. And you don't have to worry if you're being tricked, and you don't have to have expensive machines to calculate the actual silver content. So now that we've had a look at all of that, I want you to answer the question that I asked earlier in the video. Did the Royal Canadian Mint actually mint any silver dimes and quarters in 1967 out of 50% silver? Put your thoughts below in the comments and let me know what you think. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this look at one of the strange quirks of Canadian numismatics, the 1967 dimes and quarters and their composition. If you did enjoy the video, please give the video a like. I'd really appreciate that. It gets my videos out in front of more people. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, Capital Hunter, please click the button and subscribe. I'd also appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate that. I really appreciate all of your support in the 4+ years that I've been doing this channel. Thank you so much to each and every one of you. I really appreciate it. Again, thank you so much, and we'll see you again next time.
The sponsors of today's video are Lighthouse Canada and the Charlton Press. Lighthouse Canada is the leading supplier of high-quality numismatic supplies in Canada, and the Charlton Press is the leading publisher of coin and paper money catalogs and price guides for Canadian collectors. Go check out their online stores today and use the exclusive discount code CRH20 for 20% off all your purchases.